defense of militant democracy, the role of Field Marshal Sam Manekshaw, am I correct? In upholding democratic values in India.
Well, let me begin by joining everyone else and thanking the organizers for organizing this conference. Jindal University is my alma mater, and I now work as a barrister in India. And this topic, and in fact this discussion, comes as a keen interest of mine, and I am thankful to my grandfather who served in the Indian Army, who has encouraged this interest of mine to focus on these areas of studies. And often tales of Sam Manekshaw, MC, who was awarded the Military Cross for his services in Burma. He once famously said, and after this I'll share what this paper wants to do. Hopefully this quote gives us clarity as to what this man was all about. He once famously said, and I quote, "I wonder whether those of our political masters who have been put in charge of the defense of the country can distinguish between a mortar from a mortar, a gun from a howitzer, a gorilla from a gorilla, and although a great many resemble the latter." And I think this is the distinction that one needs to draw between understanding what a military leader yields and what a military leader eventually succumbs to. As this paper will begin with a general introduction of Sam Manekshaw, followed by a discussion on the theoretical underpinnings of military democracies, although having heard for the entire day, this does not require too much repetition, therefore I should limit my discussion. And while discussing these theories, or perhaps after discussing these theories, I will oscillate towards Manekshaw's periods of service to underscore the values that he had towards the theories that have been laid down not just in this paper, but across the entire day. And in some sense, this paper serves as a good segue for what is to come tomorrow. Now, having said all this, what I'd also like to share is that Manekshaw's tenure as the Chief of the Armed Forces of India came at a time when the nation was facing internal and external threats. His approach to leadership was underpinned by firm belief in the supremacy of civilian authority and the Constitution of India. He was also committed dearly to the democratic ideals, which was evident from his handling of internal crisis and the respect of law. Field Marshal, now this is his full name, Jack, Field Marshal Sam Manekshaw Jamshedji Manekshaw, MC, was one of the most distinguished leaders of the Indian Armed Forces. Now, in the subaltern days, when the British officers addressed others as Mr. and not by their ranks, since his name was rather long and was a tongue twister, his British officers and his superiors nicknamed him as Mr. Macintosh. So now Mr. Macintosh, in one of his reports as a junior officer, was named as someone who can maintain a stiff upper lip in adversity, does not lose heart, and possesses the power of command, drive, and cheerful personality. He is also popular with his fellow cadets. And this becomes an important criterion which we shall return to after discussing a few theoretical points that have been laid down in abundance this morning, therefore really negating my role in doing that to its bare minimums. But what I understand from the concepts laid down here under is the difference between a constitutional government and what might one understand in the 21st century as a demagogue or perhaps even a populist leader, and the definitions laid down by these German scholars defines constitutional governments, especially Lowenstein, defines it in terms of the conception of the rule of law that guarantees rationality and the calculability of administration. Conversely, perhaps one can understand populism as the substitution of the rule of law of a legalized opportunism in the guise of its reason of being. This also includes, but is not limited to, the high-pitched nationalist enthusiasm and a permanent psychic coercion. However, these encounters, or also these distinguishing factors, can in some sense also become follies of a democratic system. And the theoretical aspects discussed in Carl Schmitt's work on the Weimar era's writings aimed towards that is the Marshall source when discussing the constitutional state to defend it from its enemies, which are within the system, or perhaps those beyond the borders as well. These constitutional accounts also become important in understanding and defining the constitutional core and the notions in their work in military democracies in the 1928 constitutional theory, which is understood as the political content of the original decision that determines the entirety of the political unity and the specific nature of these formal procedures, which are based on the political decisions which are collectively expressed. This political substance, or at least in some sense the positive form of its constitution, through the electoral systems in, say, for instance, Nazi Germany or even the Communist parties, was threatened to undermine the bourgeois republic by legal parliamentary means. Schmitt also argues that a written constitution cannot distinguish between the political core and a mere constitutional law without circularity, as would beg the question of whether a clause itself belongs to the core or is just a mere law. Thus, the decision made by the sovereign manner can only be declared just or unjust by the exception with which it exists. Therefore, the rejection of these procedural cores in favor of a substantive core, for someone like Carl Schmitt, required a logical requirement for military democracies to even exist. While these concepts can be mirrored into the leadership strategies that I shall now illustrate, the navigation of these issues in context of a military framework and also in the context of India versus Pakistan in 1971, not on the cricket field but on the battlefield, is important because it exemplifies the balance between decisive moments of authoritarianism and measures of overarching goals of protecting the democratic values that the Indian Constitution has tried very hard to do so. I do have global perspectives as well, but since the earlier panel has touched upon these at great length, I shall limit my discussion to these, perhaps even look at the contemporary problems or the contemporary solutions that one can highlight, specifically look at issues like the economic and health crisis that we've dealt with and how populist leaders tend to erode democratic norms under the guise of responding to them in an emergency. An emergency in and of itself as a word becomes interesting in the Indian context because the constitution is in some sense averted in the eras that the Field Marshal serves in. But the application and interpretation, at least of a military democracy and the principles that vary within it across these different jurisdictions, as perhaps we've heard this morning, offers us an interesting insight. That insight, at least in the case of Manekshaw, is the balance between the necessary authoritarianism and the broader goals of defining democratic principles. Thus, these theoretical underpinnings that we've heard about this presentation and also in the other presentations in the morning are important. But I shan't even tend to get into this and move swiftly into discussing Sam Manekshaw and the adherence of his principles to instances such as planning and also execution of military campaigns, but ensuring that the conduct in war is bound between the legal and morality principles that we hold too dear to ourselves. Now, one of the examples in this is the atrocities that were committed by the armed forces of Pakistan in East Pakistan, which now we know as Bangladesh, that warranted a response. Now, under India's rule of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi and the rule of Field Marshal Sam Manekshaw, the aim was at stopping a genocide which was taking place and also restoring peace and order, thus fulfilling in some sense the criteria of just cause. But what about proportionality? Well, Sam Manekshaw once famously said, if you enter a war, you should know when to exit it. And I think this approach is in line with the principles of proportionality and also the balance between military advantage and humanitarian concerns. And this comes out in its entirety and its essence by the crafted measures that he took and the advances that he made, which were in line with the UN Charter, specifically Articles 2, 4, and 51, the rights of states to defend themselves against aggression, but also India's defense in the war is a right of its jurisdiction to protect democratic governance and regional stability. But what about principles within the international humanitarian law regime and the right to protect the doctrine that endorses this in the United Nations, which emphasizes the responsibility of states to protect populations from genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity? India's intervention in some sense, or in its entire sense, in East Pakistan under Manekshaw's command can be seen as an application of the responsibility to protect, in some sense go as far as to say the right to protect. And this use of military power as a tool of defending not just a sovereign land but also sovereign democratic values is of importance. But moving slightly away from questions of democracy, but also to his personal moral compass, in the post-war eras, Manekshaw were rejected time and again offers of political positions, emphasizing the importance of his apolitical nature and his attitude towards the armed forces. This, in some sense, acted further to solidify his commitment to upholding the democratic principles of civilian control over the military and his dedication to his professional role as a military leader. How must we now remember him is a question that is posed not just to persons within military circles, but also those related to this, such as us as lawyers. Well, the professional conduct of a man like Sam Manekshaw can be outlined in Samuel Huntington's The Soldier and the State, which advocates for a professional military that is both powerful and apolitical, and in some sense an oxymoron. But it ensures its effectiveness while safeguarding democratic institutions. To drill further deeper into the point, take the example of General Douglas MacArthur's published disagreement with Harry Truman over the conduct of the Korean War. This highlights the tensions that can arise between military leaders and civilian governance, potentially threatening the principle of civilian supremacy. Unlike MacArthur, Manekshaw's actions reinforced the integrity of India's democratic institutions by adhering to the principles of civilian control over the military, thus contributing positively towards the democratic governance and principles that we now know and cherish so deeply. I do also want to return to one point, because this requires further investigation and study. On the 16th day of December 1971, the irreverently outspoken, jocular, and fiercely moustached Parsi army chief, who was born in Amritsar and was achieved which no other military in the world could, including the US, with all its wizardry, had not really accomplished the birth of a new nation, Bangladesh. India also captured 90,000 prisoners from Pakistan. Almost 51 years now, and more, 2 generations later, this narrative still continues to captivate veteran and serving officers in all 3 forces of the armed forces in India. This also epitomizes the apogee of the military to successfully assert their status with the country's formidable political and bureaucratic establishments. But a cross-section of these officers, along with the defense and security analysts, rule that the reality in the intervening period with the military hierarchy's propensity to fearlessly express such an operation objectively has steadily disengaged, the point of vanishing thereby replaced regrettably by a service politician nexus guaranteeing reciprocal benefit. And that is, as we now know, the state of India's armed forces as well. This commitment, or at least Sam Manekshaw's commitment, in various historical accounts, analyzes the war, but also the discussions that have taken place within his circles. However, these actions and his control in the armed forces aligns not only with national law, but also his compass, his moral compass, And with those words, I now thank the chair for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts, and also go way beyond time. Thank you.
You are excellent as well, sir. Thank you very much.